Perfect. Cool. Okay, so thank you. So in this session, what we'll have a quick look at is we'll have a look at some cool new features that came in Squirrel over the past 12 months or so since the last Squirrel experience, and we'll have a quick sneak peek at looking at what's coming next in the next 2 or 3 releases of Squirrel as well, to kind of give you a look behind the scenes. So quick agenda, quickly cover about me, then we'll have the look back, and then we'll spend a bit of time looking at the cool stuff that's coming soon as well. So my name is Richard Harvey. I'm been working now for Infosol for over 10 years. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Infosol in the UK, and the co-founder of Squirrel. My primary focus is looking at the research and development and the new product enhancements that come into Squirrel. I work with the development team, but my main focus day to day is looking at all the cool new stuff that's going to come into Squirrel and play with the emerging technologies and things. So having a look back then, so Squirrel Experience was just a little over a year ago. So the first version that came out since the previous Squirrel Experiences version 1.12, that's quite a while ago. I was having a look back when I was writing this presentation at all the release notes to remind myself what we've had in there. There's tons that we've put in over the past 12 months. It's quite a challenge to try to whittle that down to a select few to talk about today. So the first ones that comes to mind, which I know was a big driver from Mel from a user experience perspective, was the introduction of simplified properties and composite changes, but we'll explain a little bit about what they actually are in a second. So simplified properties, or quick setup, was added into the product. So when you add a component now, you now have your property panel on the right hand side, and you have 2 tabs. You've got quick setup and you've got all properties. All properties shows you everything that you can change in a component. We designed Squirrel originally to be very, very granular in what you could change, which is very, very useful to give you absolute control over how you want them to look and how you want it to behave. And people like Ziv was talking about earlier has made great use of that to get real control over how Squirrel looks and feels. But the downside to that is it's a bit overwhelming and a bit confusing for people who have newly come into Squirrel, and it gets monotonous when you're trying to configure things to have to go and hunt through a large and complex property panel. So we wanted to take a look at our property panel and find a different way of exposing those properties and make it easy to configure a component. So the idea is we wanted to be able to put a button on the canvas, for example, and then very quickly get that button configured so it worked and looking good without having to spend loads of time setting every sort of minute property. You can go back later on and configure those minute properties, but to get going, we just want to be able to drag it on, do the bare minimum, and get that component working and looking nice. So we came up with the idea of the quick setup. We went through all the components and identified what those key properties were, and then expose those in here. So you can see in the button, all we want to do is set a label for the button. So what does the button say? And then what happens when you press the button? So that was our first vision for simplified properties. But then we started looking at things. Well, it's not just what happens when you press the button. We want to change how the button looks as well. So we wanted to be able to configure like border radiuses and borders and whether there's a background or not. And that's when we started coming up with a challenge, which was every time you change a property in the property panel, it goes into the undo stack. So if you press Control Z, it'll undo what you did, and Control Y to redo. But if we wanted to, say, for example, this button type in the bottom middle here, we want to, from just selecting that radio option, we want to turn the background off, turn the border on, set a little bit of border radius on it, set the border color to be the same as the text color. There's about 4 or 5 separate properties that we needed to change. And the first time we did that, it all worked great. But then if you wanted to undo that change, you had to press Control Z 5 times to undo each of those steps. So we needed to come up with a way of Squirrel being able to make composite changes, but only have that one undo in our undo stack. So we worked with that. So we've got these sorts of things, capabilities built in. We also added and exposed it for more things as well. So some like pre-canned styles where you can select button shapes. You can change chart types from a line to a spline. You can change the pre-canned colors for charts as well for different ranges and gauge styles. And all of those are using that composite approach where we can give the end user via the property one simple question, but behind the scenes it might do 10, 20, 30 different things but you don't need to do that manually and individually. So for example, The series, if you had a chart with lots of series and you wanted to change the colors, previously you'd have to go into all properties, select series 1, change the color, select series 2, change the color. If you've got 8 series, you've got to do that same action 8 times, where now just through this drop down, it will select that color range, provide all those 8 series updates without you having to do it 8 times as well. But then we took that one step further and we started to come up with the concept of accent color. So accent color is trying to not just provide a nice way of changing colors, we also want to make it so that you don't have to think about certain things. So let me give you an example. If I go to how do I hide that? If I go to my Squirrel environment and bring a button across, my accent color here is like a dark gray. As I start changing this, you can see the button is changing color to dark gray. But if I go down to a dark background color, it's automatically converted my label to be white. What it's done is you specify an accent color, which is the background color, and it's automatically identifying what contrasting color you should have so that text labels or certain bits of information aren't lost. So you don't end up with like a green button with yellow text, for example. It allows you to make one change, but behind the scenes, Squirrel is helping you to make sure that your button doesn't then start becoming lost, or the information doesn't start becoming lost in what you're changing. So what's the end result of the simplified properties? I know you can't see it. It's purposely very small. This is the number of properties that were available in a line chart. You want to style a simple line chart, there's a number of properties. I think there's about 700 properties in there. And if you wanted to go through and style or configure something, you'd have to scroll through here and remember which accordion you wanted to expand it. With simplified properties, we turned it into that. There are 6 properties. It means that you can place the line chart on your canvas. You can bind the data, you can give it a title, you can turn on a legend on or off. And to be honest, 9 times out of 10, that's good enough to get you going while you're configuring your Squirrel environment. You don't have to then hunt through all these other pieces to remember where the legend was, and you've got legend styling, you've got legend enabled, and you've got legend position. It just turning it on 1 or 2 options, and then you go into using a line chart. So this was a big piece of work that we did for 112. A couple other things that we threw into 112 as well. We added the ability to support for external Google fonts. There's a handful in here at the moment that we can support natively. We're working on a mechanism of allowing you to add your own Google fonts so that you're not restricted to just the fonts that we've got. You provide the Google font information, and the idea is then it will automatically get that baked into Squirrel for you as well. We also completely rewrote the object browser, so the new and improved object browser. So what that means is in your object browser, you can now got a search box. So you can type in and it searches both of the names. So if I type in month, it finds all objects with month in their name. It also searches for type as well. So if I type in rectangle, it'll find me all the rectangles, or chart, it'll find me all the charts and those sorts of things. That's quite handy to allow you to really drill through, especially if you've got a large and complicated project as well. We added the right-click context menu to give you quick access to actions like grouping and moving things forward and backwards, or renaming. And whereas previously that was a bit more cumbersome to get access, now that's been made available just via that context menu. And as Mel talked about, add-ons. Add-ons was another big delivery. We've been working on this for a number of years, various different iterations, and this version of add-ons V2, as we call it, is the one where we can now really get external people. We have got external people from the core Squirrel team building applications and building add-ons for Squirrel. And the add-ons don't just have to be visualizations, they can. So we've got things like Map Courier Plus that people have built, new chart visualizations, QR codes. It's not just visual stuff, as we can see here, but as like Mel showed, the animator and the window size, there's no real UI element to that. They're behind the scenes, they just either give you data or manipulate data. So we've got functions as well within the add-on framework where someone's created the ability to manipulate the data. So Donald McCormick created a trend extrapolation add-on. So therefore you can provide it a large block of data. It will then analyze that and give you that trend information. So if you wanted to visualize that on a chart, you can then choose different types of trend lines so that you can get that built onto the chart for you as well. So the add-on framework allows you to do visual stuff, but also some cool stuff behind the scenes just with manipulating and mutating and changing data. So as Mel said, marketplace.squirrel365.io is the place to go. Have a quick look there. You do a search and you can find it. So the ones that Mel was showing was the Windows and size animator, and then there's the Windows sized one here. These two here, the ones that Mel was predominantly using. And if you're interested in trying to build them, as Mel said, it is more technical. It's not really a drag and droppy approach. You do need to be a developer. Developer.squirrel365.io gives you access to all those codes. But if you've got an idea and you're not a developer, then whack it on the community. There's plenty of people on there that can jump on that, and we keep an eye on those sorts of things as well. So anything good that comes up, we can look at turning those around as well. So that was 1.12 a year ago. Moving on to the next one, 1.13 then. So this was released in December last year. There's lots of stuff that happened behind the scenes in this, but usually with our Squirrel releases, it's usually one release is very heavily orientated on new components and UI functionality, and then the next release is more kind of back-end tuning and improvements. There were some improvements, the UI improvements delivered in 1.13, but not many. So if you look, we've got the smart guides and Snap 2. So now within Squirrel, you can place on objects, and you can, as you move them around, you start getting red lines to help you align and position components next to each other, make sure they're correctly aligned without having to use the align and group by capabilities. We also added the ability to do dynamic visibility on groups. Prior to 1.13, you had to specify your logic for showing and hiding components on individual components. Now, as a group, you can select multiple components, group them up, and you can apply dynamic visibility to that group. So you can start doing some more complicated showing and hiding of components. I also did the complete rewrite of the chart. So we completely, from the ground up, rewrote how the charts worked. That was predominantly for performance improvements and to allow us to do more visualizations going forwards. And an awful lot of work was spent under the hood, making some changes to the spreadsheet. Most of those changes weren't visible in 1.13, but these were a big part, and they played a big part in improvements that were seen in 1.14 and 1.15. So segueing into 1.14, the biggest improvement that we saw in 1.14 was performance. I'll show you a video in a second, but the performance was, a lot of that was driven by the work that was done in 1.13 for the spreadsheet improvements. We identified certain bottlenecks within Squirrel we were experiencing for large and complicated projects. Just opening the project in Squirrel took a very long time. And when you then went on and viewed the project at runtime, it took a long time to get the project working. So we identified those bottlenecks as part of the 1.13 work, and we've made a lot of changes in 1.14. So I bring the video up. I've got two side-by-side videos. I've got left-hand side is 1.14, right-hand side is 1.13, and all I'm doing is I've synced the two videos up, so I'm clicking preview at the same time, and then we're timing to see how long it takes to go from pressing preview to getting to a point where the application is now workable and you can actually use and interact with it as an end user. So if I press play now, left-hand side, done and live, right-hand side is still thinking about it. So I sped the video up, that's now 3 times the speed. It's still going, and then 1.13 finally catches up. The overall time difference between the two was right-hand side for 1.13 took 36 seconds to go from pressing the preview button to launching the application. So for that application, the end user will be waiting half a minute for your Squirrel output to even become visible, where on the left-hand side, it was under 3 seconds. I think it's about 2.5 seconds from pressing that. And this project is the agenda app, and it's large. There's about 1,000 components within this project itself. So it's quite a large and complicated project. So that 10x improvement in performance was immense. And that was a big improvement that we made in 1.14. Next thing that we did, something that sounds very small, but it can make a big improvement into building projects, is we added the ability to turn on and off scroll bars on containers. So with a container, you can place a number of components into the container, and you can use those as a kind of like a separate little block. Mel used those containers earlier to show you different views for mobile, tablet, and desktop. You can use containers for grouping and sorting your components as well. But with the ability now to add scroll bars, you can do some quite cool stuff with it as well. So if I go to the the agenda here for the Speak BO experience, you can see I've got the list here. I've got nice little titles at the top, but you can see I've got a scroll bar on the right hand side. So this here is a container with all the objects. It gives me the ability now to have a separate area that is scrollable within your project while maintaining another part of it static. So the title stays static, the scroll bar becomes down. So just a simple thing of giving the ability to add scroll bars onto containers made a massive improvement to the ability that you can do some really cool outputs now as well. A couple of other things we did as well. Prior to 1.14, dynamic visibility was a very simple form. You could either go show this component when this cell equals this value. And if it didn't equal that value, it hid it. If it did equal the value, it showed it. In 1.14, we enhanced that further with this conditional logic option. So you can say when this equals that value, but you can now say, well, when this doesn't equal that value, or is less than or equal to this value, or when this cell is empty or not empty. So you start having a bit more complicated logic. Previously, if you wanted to do that, you would have to do that logic in the Excel spreadsheet and work out the formulas. What we did instead of now bake that into Squirrels. We've rolled that out in future releases into other Boolean type, true or false type scenarios. So, for example, you can disable a drop down when previously it was when a certain value became another value. Now you can have a lot more complicated control over when to disable drop downs, for example. And then lastly is we introduce the extension. So an extension is different to an add-on. So an add-on is something that improves the Squirrel experience. So when you're in Squirrel, you can add more things like the animations that Mel showed, whereas an extension gives you the ability to enhance another product. So we already had a PowerPoint extension, so where you could embed a Squirrel project into PowerPoint, so you can see the interactive project inside of PowerPoint. And we added the extension for Webby custom elements, so where you can embed a Squirrel project into Web Intelligence and also into Tableau as well. So if I've got this is it in Webby. If I bring across my Web Intelligence, here we go. So this is a Squirrel project inside Web Intelligence. I've got the data in my Web Intelligence report. This Squirrel project's got no data in it. The data is passed from Web Intelligence into Squirrel, and then I can then interact with Squirrel, and it will produce my output for me with all the full interactivity and everything. And all that is now sourcing its data from this data that's being passed into there. So this is an extension. So it is in extending another product, and it gives you the ability to bring Squirrel into other platforms. So we have got the custom elements here in Web Intelligence, and exactly the same flow in Tableau. You get data from the Tableau, it injects it into the Squirrel output, and you can view that within your Tableau dashboard. We're also working on, hopefully later this year or early next year, a extension for Power BI as well. So that is the end of 2022, bringing us forward now to 2023. So what have we been working on this year? 1.15. So 1.15 came out in, I think, June of this year, and 1.15 had a number of things. So the previous one had lots of back-end stuff. This one's got some really good front-end changements. So the first one up is repeat container. So there's a number of posts and things we put on the community about it, but a quick example about what repeat containers is and why we wanted to create it. If you look at a website like eBay, for example, you've got this UI here, and you've got lots of sections which are just repeated, the same sort of information with subtly different data in it. So you've got, as I repeated over here, different rows of information. So you've got an image, you've got some labels, you've got some buttons. And if I wanted to build that in Squirrel, I'd have to put an image and some labels and some buttons, and then another image and labels and buttons and another image. And then you start realizing with all these labels and images and buttons, the number of components you're building is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you then suddenly say, actually, I don't want a blue button, I want it to be orange, you have to then go and change each of those buttons multiple times, and it gets very, very convoluted. We wanted a simpler way of doing that in Squirrel. So if I go to this one here, as you can see in Squirrel here, we've got the image for the person, we've got a few text labels, we've got a line to do the bottom here, and I've placed this inside the repeat container. And what the repeat container says is repeat all of these components and all the bindings for these components for every row in this block here. So if I go into preview now, it's now created me all of those rows. I don't have to bind them up manually. I don't have to put multiple components in there. It's just 7 components. But using the repeat container, it's automatically added and incremented those for me. So that's turned that into a real quick implementation rather than a pain of going through and wiring up everything multiple times. The next thing we did in 1.15 is impact analysis. I'll show you a couple of screenshots and then we'll jump into Squirrel and have a look at it in action. So impact analysis gives you the ability to right-click on a cell in the spreadsheet. And it is useful for things like if you're picking up a project you haven't looked at for a while, or you're picking up someone else's project, to know where data comes from, where it's being used, and what components are connected to it. So when you right-click, you've got 2 options: inspect bindings and inspect cell references. Bindings give you all the components that are using that cell. So whether that's a visual thing or whether it's a function, and the cell references tells you from an Excel point of view, the spreadsheet point of view, what formulas are using that cell and what cell that uses. So let me jump into Squirrel and I'll give you an example. This one here. So I've got a little what if calculator, it's a pricing calculator for a karaoke company. If I go, where's that £10 come from? I can kind of guess that that £10 is driving that value there. But what changes that value? So if I right click on it, inspect bindings, I can see the text label. So if I select text label, it tells me, yep, it's that text label in that container. And it's the text displays bound that's highlighted now. So I know that is now what that cell is being used for. And I can see the slider next to it. Yeah, slider. So I know now me changing that slider is going to change that number. But what else is using that? Because I know changing that number will drive my total value in my calculator. So if I right click on that, Excel, inspect cell references, this is just the number 10. So I know it's not using anything. If I had a sum in there, so it was like equal sum of A1 to A3, I would see that in here. So this left-hand side tells you what other cells are using, this cell is used by. On the right-hand side, it tells you downstream what other cells in the spreadsheet are looking at that. So you can see here per person 5, this one here, which is the sum of E2 times E3 times E4, as you can see here, E2, E3, E4, that is what is controlling that number. So I can start now stepping through and say, well, also it's being per person I2 is also using that cell. So I can then start going through, and you can use this impact analysis to start tracing through. So if you're wanting to make a change to a cell, you want to know where a component gets its data from, using this is a really cool way of getting at that information from within Squirrel, and you can see what's going on. A couple of other things we added into 1.15 as well was bulk property changes V1, caveat the V1. So what that is previously, if I wanted to change a couple of text labels, I'd have to go into the label, make a change, go into the next label, make a change. But what we can do now is I can select both text labels and I can say, make them both underline. You can set multiple text labels and it'll apply that change to all of them at the same time. The reason why it's V1 is it's limited at the moment to everything within the same group or the same container. So if I wanted to expand this and say, select text label 21, I can't select that across multiple groups. We're working on that, and that will be coming in V2. But for V1 at the moment, if I wanted to change all these text boxes, for example, it's quite handy. I can make the change and it will apply that across the board without having to go through multiple times and make multiple changes. And similarly, font switcher as well. So fonts are a bit easier to handle. The changing properties in different containers is a lot more complicated. Fonts was quite straightforward, and it's one of those things that we hit regularly when we're working with client work. We'll build something, we'll get it all working, and then we'll show it to the client and say, that's fantastic, but we don't want you to use Arial, we want you to use Times New Roman, for example. And you'd have to go through every single component and make every single change. So what this does instead, if you go to edit, find and replace fonts, it gives you a list of all the fonts, including their styling, the bold, italic, underline, the font sizes, and you can globally make changes. So I can change all pop-in 10s to Arial 10s, or I could change all pop-in 10s to Arial 12 and all pop-in 12 to Arial 12. So you can have combinations of different changes, but that will globally change everything. Everywhere a font is used, it will globally go through and change that for you. And very, very useful tool when you're looking at making big bulk changes. So that was one thing. That's the last release that we released earlier this year. So what is coming next. So the coming soon section then. First up, we've talked about it briefly at IBIS, is PWAs. So what are PWAs? Well, PWAs are progressive web applications. So progressive web applications are applications that look and feel like native applications. They look and feel like a native mobile application or a native desktop application, but they are actually a website that has been built using web technology, and you can then install it on your device. It's installable on both desktop and mobile, and it looks and feels like the native application. Let me just log into my phone quickly. There we go. And from a Squirrel perspective, which is very useful, if you've got embedded data, like data in your spreadsheet, then you can embed that and make that available offline. So if you've got a what if calculator, you can make that available offline without the need for any internet connectivity. So you can go out to a client site with your iPad, for example, with a Squirrel project baked into it, and then you can use it offline. PWAs aren't new, but they're just starting to gain some traction now. They've been around for quite a while. So in fact, Gartner predicted back in 2020 that PWAs will replace 50% of native apps. Didn't specify the time frame, but they're usually quite good at hedging their bets. They specified with multiple years expected to be breakthrough years, and we usually know that Gartner predictions you can kind of take with a grain of salt, and they don't always come true. But it does look like with PWAs that they're gaining traction. We are seeing it in lots of applications that you don't necessarily realize are PWAs. A good example is Photoshop, traditionally a massive monolithic image editing piece of software, is now been rewritten as a web application and is available as a PWA to download onto your machine. Microsoft Visual Studio Code is a full-blown code editing piece of software, is available online. So here, this is Visual Studio Code. It's a fully interactive and does exactly the same as the desktop version of Visual Studio Code, and is available, as you can see up here in the little download icon, as a PWA, so an installable application. Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Spotify. There are probably more PWAs out there than you realize. You can tell it, as I said, from in the top right corner. If you have a little download icon, it means you can download and install that on your desktop, on your mobile phone, and then it'll look and feel like a native application. So let's have a quick look at that in action. So this is my phone here, my daughter crying on the screen. So we've got the Acme Karaoke application here, which we showed in Squirrel a minute ago. So this is your what if calculator. It's got this full functionality of Squirrel, including the export capabilities that Ziv has been using as well. And it shows that it doesn't look like a Squirrel application. It looks like a native application. I can close it like a normal application. It's got its own icon on the desktop. I can launch it. So this is a PWA. So this is a way to package and deliver and deploy applications to your end user without it feeling like a website. You can make it install as an icon and make it deliverable like that as well. So next then is some new connectors. So we've had Excel and Google Sheets connector for quite a while now, but they were quite cumbersome to use. They were taking publicly available links that you had to share and put it in there. And now we wanted to kind of make that a bit more integrated and not having to use those exported things. So jump into my demos again. Let's go back over to here. So hot off the press, I've got my Squirrel application here. Go to my connections. I've now got an Excel OneDrive option. Add that. First thing it's going to ask me to do is select what's my OneDrive account. So I've got OneDrive for business. I've also got my personal OneDrive. Let's look at my business one for the moment. Select my document. So it's now browsing through my OneDrive. I can now select my spreadsheet from OneDrive. What sheet do I want from that spreadsheet? Let's say choose report 1. And then let's place it into a new data sheet. If I sync the data now, what this is doing, this is now making a live call against OneDrive and getting that information out. So as the data changes in OneDrive, you can choose to refresh of this and it'll then get the new and latest version as well. So the Excel connector, as you can see, is in and working. We're working on the Google Sheets connector as well. We've got all the pieces built for that, which kind of pull them all together. But the connectors won't just be read. We'll also have the ability to write back and edit and delete rows from spreadsheets, for both in Excel and in Google. Previously, you had to do that with Zapier. Now we're looking to get that baked in native within the Squirrel application as well. And the last two pieces then is what Ziv was using and talking about was the ability to export from Squirrel. So export to PowerPoint, as Ziv mentioned, is you build your PowerPoint presentation, for example, this one here for our karaoke machine, and you place certain placeholders. So like we're using double curly braces as an indication for a placeholder. So like per price, count availability. And then what you would do in Squirrel is you would then say, well, replace that per price with the value that I'm going to pass up from Squirrel. So as I slide things around in the calculator and press the button, it will then send that up to the Squirrel platform. Squirrel platform will take the PowerPoint presentation, replace all those placeholders, and give you a PowerPoint back at the end. And we're also working at the moment on getting that to output as PDF as well. So you can choose to output that as a PowerPoint slide or as a PDF document as well. And the last thing that's working, and some of the eagle-eyed of you might have noticed, is Designer in the browser. At the moment, Squirrel is a desktop application. So you have to install Squirrel on your desktop. Every time there's a new release, you get a prompt, that annoying window that pops up, says, hey, there's something new, and you have to go and download it and install it again. We're working on Designer in the browser. As I said, the eagle-eyed people, all my demos that I've been doing have been run in the browser. So they're not run on the desktop application like Mel was using or Ziv was using. This is all running in the browser. So this is coming later this year. We've just got to get putting it through its paces, but most of the work for that is now done. So that's on the to-do or on the to-release list too as well. And that's me. Any questions? If we don't cover any of the questions off here, feel free to jump onto the community and post them on there as well.
There's a lot of good stuff there, Rich. I'm particularly excited about the PWAs. I never realized that the Starbucks app is a PWA. Now, I use that one every day. So you're saying that it actually works offline as well as online? I thought I had to be connected.
So certain applications, you can build PWAs to be only online. So certain things like Starbucks, it makes sense. If you're going to place an order, you can't do that offline. You need to be connected to Starbucks to send them the order. But the ability with PWAs gives you the ability to snapshot your application and store that on offline. So some sites might just say, well, let's just store the core framework. So a good example is Facebook. When you launch Facebook, you see lots of little scaffolding and placeholders while it's fetching the data. So that scaffolding and placeholders will be available offline. And then while it's behind the scenes for getting the data, you can then show the data. So it's having a combination of online and offline to enrich that experience. You don't end up with just a white screen while it's waiting for something to be loaded. But with the benefit with Squirrel is if your data is embedded within the spreadsheet, then you don't need to wait to get external data, that sort of thing. So those calculators, that karaoke calculator, for example, is perfect because I can do all that with a client, show them all the values, and we can demonstrate the business benefit without necessarily needing to be connected to an internet if that pub or club that you're in hasn't got a good internet connection.
Right. No, that's excellent. As I said, I'm very, very excited about that. Quick question from Reg. Will export be only available from the cloud or both cloud and local?
To be defined at the moment. It does require touch in the cloud, because obviously if you're going to be exporting the PowerPoint, we need to store that PowerPoint somewhere. So the PowerPoint will be stored in the cloud environment, but will it be available to local? I can't see any reason why not. But that's something to be defined. We still need to work out that. But if that's something you're interested in, then that's absolutely, we can make a note of that and we can include that in there and talk to you about it as we start moving forward and further with that as well. So at the moment, it's in with a handful of customers who are trying it. So we can reach out, Reg, and work out what's what.
Yeah, and also obviously very exciting about what's coming with the Squirrel developer being in the cloud and so forth. That topic actually came up during the Speak BO yesterday about how people were asking more for, can't we go back to desktop clients again? Which is like the complete reversal, but while I was pointing out that the trend was actually going in the other direction. But I think the ability to have both, and PWA is a great example of that. Is what people really want. We want our cake and we want to eat it too.
Yeah, we've taken our time with the design in the browser, and we've architected Squirrel in a way that it's not. The plan isn't to get rid of the desktop and have the design in the browser. They are using the same code base behind the scenes, and so their plan is always to have the desktop version and also the online version. So it's not an either or, and it's not like when Tableau wanted to roll out Tableau in the cloud, and then they had a massive feature parity between what was available in the desktop tool versus the cloud tool.
Right.
There's by and large, there's obviously some challenges with some of the functionality, but by and large, the functionality is absolute parity between desktop and client. There's only minor things. So things like using images. You can't use local images in the browser, but you can in the client, for example. Minor little changes like that, but by and large, it's feature parity. And as a direction, we're looking to keep both those versions of Squirrel, desktop and client, in the browser in step and released.
Cool. Mel.
Well, I was just going to add to that, actually, when we're talking about the designer in the browser and Rich talking about feature parity. It's interesting because designer in the browser is going to drive a few innovations as well for us. So Rich mentioned the images and not being able to access them locally, which is going to drive us to provide sort of kind of like a media library or some kind of shared area for assets and things like that, which would be a great thing to have in the product and something we would like in it anyway. So it's quite nice that that sort of cloud based design or that delivery of it from the web is driving some cool innovations too.
Right. Cool. And again, hats off to you, Rich, because I had no idea that you were using the browser-based version there. Sorry, the cloud-based version there. I had no idea. So that was good. Very good. Okay, excellent. Well, Rich and Mel hopefully will be here for the happy hour later today.
Yeah.
And answer more questions. But thank you again, Rich. That was absolutely excellent. Let me hand back to Johnny.